Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go in to the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Please download the app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content. And Joe and I go live Thursday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern Time on X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube, where we do more social and political commentary. Well, these interviews, Veritas is gracious enough to allow us to post these interviews on our social media also. And wherever you see us, help us out. If you like what we do, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Let's jump right in. This is one of those conversations, where when we say we're going into the breach, we ain't kidding, okay? Because especially when you're talking about China, when you're, just generally as a topic, a lot of people don't want to confront a lot of the realities involving that nation. But David Pinault, who's a friend of the show, he emailed us and said, "Hey guys, I think I should come on because I want to talk about an article that I wrote. That's speaking for David. He wrote in the Catholic World Report, and the article, and we'll post a link." To the article in the description, wherever you're watching this on social media. The article is Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli, Reflections on Taiwan's Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End of Times. Like I said, this is going to be an interesting conversation. David Pinault, for those of you who are not familiar, is an emeritus professor of religious studies at Santa Clara University. Among his books are two titles published by Ignatius Press: The Crucifix on Mecca's Front Porch, A Christian's Companion for the Study of Islam, and a novel called Providence Blue, a fantasy quest. In April, Ignatius will publish a new novel by David about communist China's persecution of Catholic Christians and China's involvement in the illegal trafficking of wildlife. This new novel is entitled Earth, Dragon, Run, a Spiritual Entertainment. David Pinault, welcome back. Welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe, brother.
Thank you so much, Joe. And it's a real honor and a pleasure to be back with you again.
Thank you. And I just let me throw it over to Joe. We'll start with a prayer, and then we'll have a great conversation.
David, we always start with a prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen.
Amen.
Name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen.
Joe, do you mind if I ask a general question of David?
Yeah, go, please.
All right. David, here's one of my issues that I have and have had for a long time with all nations that are brutal. Okay, and China's Communist Party is brutal. Let's be clear about that. Okay, I know I don't have to convince you of that. Unfortunately, we find ourselves that we have to convince others of that. I have a question that may seem naive, but I'm going to ask it anyway. America has had a history of doing business with brutal regimes. Okay, America did business with the Nazis. America, just because the Soviet Union was our mortal enemy doesn't mean there was not at least, indirect trade with the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc. Okay, the Chinese Communist Party is brutal. Okay, they're not humane in any way. There's no way that we, as Americans, here's my larger question. I'll shut up. We don't demand of our government that we do something about not doing business with China. Telling Apple you can't do business with a nation that is as authoritarian as China is because of the Chinese Communist Party. You know where I'm going with this question. Why do we allow it? Does it just come down to economic benefit and we'll just do business with anybody?
Well, I think it has to do, it's an excellent question, John. I think it has to do with the fact that so many of us in the United States of America forget that one of the most important songs in our history is God Bless America. We forget that we've been blessed by God to be able to live here. But what that means is that we should be spiritually oriented, not materialistically oriented. But too many of us have fallen into materialism, which means that we become too hungry for money. It seems to me that the incoming Trump administration has an opportunity here to begin definitively decoupling our economy from China's. because what happens is people become compromised financially, and then they choose to overlook the manifest brutality that you so accurately described. We need to recapture our sense of the fact that we're simply pilgrims on this earth. This is not our primary home. We are oriented towards reunion with God. We lose track of that in this country. And as I said, with the incoming Trump administration, it's an opportunity for us to turn things around.
Well, it's one of the things that I would say about, Catholic social teaching, going back to, let's say, for argument's sake, Rerum Novarum, is, Pope Leo the 13th. He made
Yes.
it clear the condemnation was clear of communism, but there
Yes.
is there is an equal condemnation, because remember, this is the late 19th century. There's an equal condemnation of consumerism, okay? Because both the capitalist worldview and the communist worldview, and are at their core, are materialist worldviews. And as you said, we need to get our spiritual bearings back.
That's right. We tend to forget that the Chinese Communist Party, like its Soviet version before it, is oriented around what it calls scientific atheism. In other words, it is not a question of somehow being able to just do business indefinitely. The Chinese Communist Party actively wants to undermine our way of life so as to let scientific atheism prevail. And if it's one thing that I've been able to see close up, is the fact that under Xi Jinping, the present maximum leader of China, what China does is systematically to crush in any way that it can the expression of religion, because the Chinese Communist Party regards religion in general and Christianity in particular as rivals that cannot be tolerated.
No, absolutely. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, click the link into this. We're going to do an overview of David's article and have this conversation. We would encourage you to actually read. It's a fairly long essay. It's not even an article, it's an essay, in the Catholic World Report, Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli, Reflections on Taiwan's Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End of Time. Joe Resinello, thanks for letting me jump in there, but I'm going to throw it over to you.
I just want to kind of broaden David's background. He's very humble. David is an intellectual. He teaches, he's retired teacher at a Jesuit university in California. He has a background in Arabic. He knows Cardinal Zen. He's been on the show a number of times. I don't mean to, embarrass him, but I just want to say what he has to say is important. This is an important conversation. He's traveled through the region, and Americans, frankly, sometimes shouldn't pay attention to the narrative that's coming out of the mainstream media. These are voices that matter. These are voices that are at our disposal, and we should pay attention to them. I just wanted to throw that at our listeners. And I also want to invite David to give us some background. He is a scholar on Taiwan and China, just to give some context around where this conversation will probably go.
Okay, good. Thank you, Joe. So first of all, just to kind of get it oriented visually and geographically, one reason why there's such an entangled history between Taiwan and China is because Taiwan is situated just off the southeast coast of China, near what we call Fujian and Guangdong, what used to be called Canton Province. Less than 100 miles separate Taiwan, the island of Taiwan, from China. You look at the map and you'll see that it's not far from the ports of Hong Kong and Macau. Just to the south of Taiwan, quite close, in the northern Philippines, island of Luzon. You may remember those names from the Second World War. And then to the northeast, you've got the Korean Peninsula and southern Japan, the island of Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands. So that situates it. Now, in terms of general relations, of course, there has been back and forth contact between Taiwan and China going back centuries. But people settled Taiwan originally, not just from China, but also from, say, Southeast Asia, Malay peoples from what is today Malaysia. And then in the course of the 16th and 17th centuries, you had colonists, settlers, business people, merchants from a number of places settling in Taiwan. You had the Portuguese presence there. In fact, it was Portuguese sailors who exclaimed when they saw Taiwan, they said, Ilha Formosa, a beautiful island. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that that was the old traditional name for Taiwan, Formosa. You had Portuguese there, Spanish settlers, Dutch, and also Japanese. And in fact, in 1894, 1895, Japan fought a war with China, as a result of which Taiwan became a colony of Japan. So from 1895 until the end of the Second World War, for a 50-year period, Taiwan was actually a colony of Imperial Japan. And that Japanese influence is also still important today. And it's also important to know that you may recall that during the Second World War, not only was China fighting against invasion from Imperial Japan, but a civil war went on for years in which Mao Zedong, with his People's Liberation Army, was trying to impose atheist communist rule on China. His main opponent was a General Chiang Kai-shek, pro-American, supported by the United States, leading the nationalist forces. Even after Japan was defeated in 1945, that civil war in China continued until eventually Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists, and keep in mind that Chiang Kai-shek himself was Christian, he had converted to Christianity, and he fled from China offshore to Taiwan and set up what was called the Republic of China in Taiwan. And one thing I want to emphasize here very strongly is the fact that Taiwan has never been ruled by Communist China, even though Xi Jinping, General Secretary and President of Communist China, lays claim to it.
This may seem obvious, David Pinault, but let me just throw it right back to you. What is China's claim on Taiwan? What legitimate claim do they pretend to have?
Well, first of all, I would say my personal analysis is that the Chinese Communist Party is terrified of the idea that there could be an independent Chinese state that claims, it's possible to have democracy. And because so often you hear this rhetoric from Communist China to the effect that, this business about democracy and so forth, that's an alien import from the West. So, first of all, Communist China cannot tolerate this. Now, what had happened was that in the 17th century, the Manchu Qing dynasty conquered Taiwan. So it was under the administration of the Chinese Empire that predates communism by centuries. Mm-hmm. It's certainly true that there are cultural links. The official language of Taiwan is Mandarin, okay, which is also the official language there. But the thing that I want to emphasize here is that as far as the people of Taiwan are concerned, what has happened is they've been able to develop in a way that's been completely different from what's happened on the mainland. In other words, after the Civil War, in 1949, you have communism established in China. Mao Zedong rules from 1949 until his death in 1976. You have one series of disasters after another, very, very brutal, going on in the mainland. You may have heard of the Great Leap Forward, the disastrous attempt by Mao to collectivize the agriculture, to strip private property away, to mass industrialize the country. You have the Cultural Revolution from 1966, which really didn't end until Mao died in 1976, tearing the whole country apart, trying to quote unquote purify it ideologically as a communist state. But in the meantime, what had happened is that although Chiang Kai-shek originally rules as a dictator, you have a move towards democracy in Taiwan so that now it really is a fully fledged democracy. And I can say from having been there when Jody and I were there that the people of Taiwan, they love the government they have, they love their freedoms, and they are very much oriented towards the West.
So if you're just joining us, David Pinault is here, and we'd encourage you to click on the link in the description to the Catholic World Report, David's essay, Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli, Reflections on Taiwan's Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End Time. I'm going to hand it over to Joe, but I will tell you this, David, one movie, usually Hollywood produces trash, but one movie I thought really captured, gave viewers, audiences a really good idea of kind of like that whole era with the Civil War, with Mao, was The Last Emperor. I believe it was Bernardo Bertolucci directed The Last Emperor. I would encourage anybody to go see that if you wanted to see what happened to the old regime, as Mao and this great leap forward and the Cultural Revolution came in, and exactly what they did. It's a very good movie. Joe Resinello.
David, the last time you were here, we talked about Cardinal Zen on a visit you made out to China. Now we're obviously talking about Taiwan. You recently, and you mentioned the trip with your wife, Jody, that you just in Taiwan. You had dinner with a retired diplomat, part of the Foreign Affairs group in Taiwan. Tell us about that dinner. What did he have to say? Obviously, boots on the ground always have a strong message for the people.
Yes. And I'll mention here that you'll notice in the article that I really try to minimize the names of people that were our contacts and so forth. And the reason why is because of the fact that Communist China has recently passed a law through its puppet legislature condemning any people, especially in Taiwan, who talk about independence or separatism from communist China. Anyone who's regarded as what they call a splittist or separatist can be subject to the death penalty. And people in Taiwan are very aware of that. In any case, Jody and I had the privilege of having dinner with a retired member of Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this is someone who has traveled worldwide. He's had a chance to compare various political and social systems. He's very much pro-Western, pro-democracy, pro-America. And one of the things that he's pushing for is the idea that in order to continue to attract the support of America and other pro-democratic powers, such as Japan, Australia, etc., that Taiwan needs to develop itself further in terms of self-defense to make itself into what he calls a porcupine. That is friendly enough, as long as you don't disturb it, but completely indigestible in case some opponent, namely Communist China, tries to swallow it. And so he is advocating for several things. One thing that he said to us is that Taiwan needs to step up the procurement, production of various munitions, especially with regard to developing things like maritime sea mines, because the fact that if the People's Liberation Army from mainland China tries to invade, it'll partly be seaborne to bring in the infantry, the hundreds of thousands of troops they anticipate invading, sea mines, autonomous drones, developing their missiles. So the thought is Taiwan, with its population of only about 25 million people, obviously cannot stand up indefinitely against an invasion from a country with 1.4 billion people. But the thinking is, first, Taiwan has to demonstrate its willingness to fight, and second, to hold out long enough for the cavalry to arrive. That's us. That's America, plus our allies, all of whom are very concerned about safeguarding Taiwan. You know, Douglas MacArthur, the famous general of America's army, had said that we should think of Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, right? And it's a major base for safeguarding the Pacific. So we want Taiwan to survive, partly for its own sake, for its precious democracy and the good of its own people. But Taiwan is also vital to the security of the West and especially American national security. Now, the ex-minister from Foreign Affairs also went on to talk about how we need to, he says, in Taiwan, to continue to educate ourselves about the dangers from China, from propaganda infiltration. He says that we need to constantly educate people to the attempt by Communist China to undermine our democracy, including from within. He's very much aware of the constant threat that's being posed by China. So it was a very positive, very encouraging conversation with him. He also mentioned the fact that he pointed out that there are hundreds of mountains. You have to picture the terrain of the island of Taiwan. In the interior, there are a number of mountains, hundreds of them actually, that are each over 10,000 feet in height. And he said that this right now, he says, Taiwan is already beginning to stockpile munitions, food, etc., in essentially mountain redoubts, so that he says, if necessary, what we're working on doing is mobilizing our armed forces, divide them up into small lethal units that can scatter, and encourage basically preparedness for guerrilla warfare, so that if China manages to land an invasion force, we can fall back to the mountains, continue resistance there. It's a kind of a whole of society approach. And I should mention that some of the people that we have interviewed have mentioned that their organizations, because there are a number of civil defense, civil preparedness organizations now very active in Taiwan, and they have sent observers to Ukraine to study how Ukraine has managed to hold off the Russians under Putin for 3 years now. So there's a lot going on in Taiwan for us to be aware of.
Now, this might seem like a naive question, but what's to prevent China, rather than a land invasion, what's to prevent China from just, pardon my French, bombing the crap out of Taiwan?
Right. Well, that's a very good question. Of course, keep in mind that, first of all, here's the thing. Xi Jinping is constantly talking about how we in the mainland and on Taiwan, we're all one people. We love Taiwan. There's this constant propaganda, okay? These are fellow Chinese. They should not be separated from us, right? They should be reunited with the motherland, right? So it looks a little bad if they have to, as you say, bomb the crap out of Taiwan. Not that the Communist Party will be reluctant to do it if they have to, but they like to keep the mask on, because the thing to keep in mind is that Taiwan is only one step. I hate to be blunt about it, it's about to say it. In my opinion, Taiwan is just one step on the path that the Chinese Communist Party has plotted for hegemony, for dominating the entire world. I am absolutely convinced of that. And the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is active all over the world, in Asia, Africa, South America, and including in North America and the United States.
Oh, yeah, no. They're busy all the time. I mean, Xi Jinping is doing what Stalin, basically could have only dreamed of.
Yeah,
I mean, right. He's got the world on his side. It's like that's why I started the conversation earlier. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we have David Pinault. Is that the world allows us? Like, why do we allow for abhorrent ideas to, like, if something is bad, if something is evil, demonstrably so, David? Why do we allow? Let's say, I'll give you an example. Why do we allow our institutions, our so-called educational institutions, the Ivy League, to teach communism as some sort of legitimate alternative worldview? It should be condemned, as the Black Book of Communism called it, okay, as an international criminal conspiracy, because that's what communism is. The same way we condemn Nazism, the same way we're supposed to condemn communism. We're not supposed to do business with these people. David, give me a comment before the break.
Yeah. So I first of all, I completely agree with you. And the part of the problem is that so many members of academia uh, in our country have a completely romanticized view about socialism in general, communism in particular. I don't know how many times I've heard people make claims like, "Oh well, under Mao, people were lifted out of poverty," completely disregarding the reality, the brutalities of what happened in the Great Leap Forward of the Cultural Revolution. Mao was responsible for the death, the killings of, like 45 million people. I mean, we in the United States, we choose to be ignorant of this fact. And I have to say that part of the problem is that uh, so many people in America, and I hate to say it because I'm a scholar, I'm an academic myself, but so many of my colleagues, I've seen this. They have a very cynical view of religion, regarding religion as childish, particularly Christianity. They have a kind of offhand contempt for what you and I regard as precious and as essential. And unfortunately, that attitude, that romanticized attitude about communism, then goes hand in glove with all the financial inducements to continue, as you mentioned earlier, doing business with China. You know, um, I mean, there's a saying attributed to Vladimir Lenin, Russia's Communist Party. We will sell the capitalists, right? I'm sorry, the capitalists will sell us the rope. The capitalists are going to sell us the rope with which we're going to hang them.
Right.
So much of what we do has tended to be self-destructive.
Well,
And
what
we've
we
got
need, we have to take a break here at the front line with Joe and Joe. David Pinault is joining us here. What we need is we need we need a little a new anti-communist movement in America, starting with higher education. Starting with
yeah,
higher education, completely defunded. And if you put up a poster of Lenin, and I saw this in my life, if you're a professor and you put up a poster of Lenin in your office, okay, you're fired. The same way as if you put up a picture of Goebbels or Hitler, you're fired. That's it. No, we got to it's time we have to take the gloves off. And like you said, stop allowing the useful idiots, okay, to run our institutions. Communism should be condemned. Pure and
yeah,
simple. We're glad
yes,
you're here, David. Joe and I are both passionate about this subject because we don't understand for the life of us why people allow this to happen. Please go and go. Well, first of all, click the link in the description to read David's essay. Okay, this is in the Catholic World Report: Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli Reflections on Taiwan's Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End of Time. To get educated on these things, and stick around for another great segment with David Pinault. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. We're way in the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network with David Pinault. David has written a new essay that's we would like for you to read the whole thing. Click the link in the description. Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli. Reflections on Taiwan's Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End of Time. He wrote that for the Catholic World Report. Joe Rossinello, let's jump right back in.
David, recently, China put on a show trial with Cardinal Zen. For those who don't know, he is a great cardinal. If you ask me, he is truly a voice for the church. He's located in Hong Kong. Thankfully, they did not put Cardinal Zen in prison. He's very old. He's in his 90s. However, there was an article in the Taipei Times where one of the president's spokespeople basically wrote about their solidarity with those who've been imprisoned in Hong Kong. And just as you were talking in the other segment, it seems to me like this is just another domino. I mean, basically, China kind of wrapped their tentacles around Hong Kong, and now Hong Kong is kind of under control, and now this is just the next domino. Talk about that statement, I think, from the presidential office in Taiwan, talking about their, they have solidarity with those who are in Hong Kong. Because basically, listen, as Catholics, we believe in freedom, not just as Americans, but as Catholics. And if you don't believe in freedom, if you're suppressing freedom, if you want to put a cardinal in prison, who's next? It could be me, it could be you. Talk about that statement. I think it's a brave one.
Okay, thank you. So to give our listeners a little bit of background here, you may be aware that Hong Kong and southern China had been a British crown colony for a good long time from the 1840s. And then in 1997, Britain handed Hong Kong over to Communist China with the understanding that was agreed to by a written treaty that Hong Kong, which had enjoyed much greater freedoms under the British, that Hong Kong would be part of what a model called one country, two systems, meaning that, all right, Hong Kong would be regarded as part of the mainland China from now on, but it would have its own distinct system with far greater freedom, far greater political autonomy. In fact, it was officially called the Hong Kong Semi-Autonomous Region. Okay. Well, what we discovered when we went there, Jody and I, when we had, as you mentioned, we had the privilege of dinner with Cardinal Joseph Zen, and we learned a lot from our conversation with him. This was in December of 2018. And just as background, if you're not familiar with Cardinal Zen, he is one of the truly great Catholic heroes, as far as I'm concerned. This is someone who grew up in Shanghai during the Japanese occupation, World War II. He fled to Hong Kong just ahead of Mao's takeover of the country in 1949. And Joseph Zen became a Catholic priest, volunteered to go back to China as a missionary during the Cultural Revolution, had a number of adventures there, imprisonment, etc. Eventually manages to make it back to Hong Kong, becomes Bishop of Hong Kong, eventually is appointed a cardinal. And by the way, I'll mention that Cardinal Zen has always admired and had the greatest respect, especially for Pope Benedict XVI, two of them great, great friends. In any case, to this day, Cardinal Zen remains one of the foremost opponents of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, one thing that really came out in our conversation with Cardinal Zen, he emphasized how savagely the Chinese Communist Party persecutes the Christian population of China. All right, so in 2020, not too long after our visit, it turns out that China imposes on Hong Kong a so-called national security law that completely crushes the freedom promised to the people of Hong Kong as a semi-autonomous region and makes a mockery of the one country, two systems model. Now, what has just happened recently is that Beijing threw into prison another 45 democracy activists in Hong Kong. And in response to that, Taiwan, its government, and its spokesperson, Karen Kuo, whom you mentioned, issued a public statement in response to this jailing of more Hong Kong freedom activists, making note of the following, namely that Xi Jinping has been trying to allure Taiwan by saying, hey, we've got something set up for you, and it's called one country, two systems. So you can keep the freedom and the democracy that you love if you just agree to reunify with us. And the Taiwan government spokeswoman, Karen Kuo, responded in an official statement of solidarity with those imprisoned Hong Kong protesters. And what she said was, yesterday's sentencing not only breaks the promise of a high degree of autonomy, but also further proves the unworkability of this one country, two systems. The people of Taiwan and Hong Kong share a common pursuit of freedom and democracy. Very important statement.
Yeah, David Pinault joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please click the link in the description. Go read the full essay. Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli, Reflections on Taiwan, Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End of Time that's available at the Catholic World Report. What's funny is that you were talking about Hong Kong. It reminded me, I mean, this is what we're up against, David, just to give you a quick story. You might remember this. So the NBA makes a lot of money in China. The National Basketball Association makes a ton of money. All right. So the general manager of one of the basketball teams, I'm not going to say who it is, all right, tweeted out, "I stand with Hong Kong." Somebody tweeted, this is when it was Twitter, not X. Somebody tweeted back that that general manager should be fired for saying, "I stand with Hong Kong." The owner of the team liked the statement that his general manager should be fired for very simply saying, "I stand with Hong Kong." And LeBron James comes out and says, "Well, I'm for freedom of speech and everything, but there's money at stake." I'm paraphrasing, but that's really what he said. And we tolerate it. We tolerate it. And for the life of me, I say to myself, I don't give a darn. All right. This is a family show. We don't curse. All right. I don't give a darn. Okay. About, well, if we don't do business with China, or we're going to take a hit economically. Okay, maybe. So will they. Probably more so. Why is it? I guess my larger question is, when I was a kid, when Joe and I were both kids, we were under the impression that the Soviet Union could annihilate the United States of America at any time. That Ronald Reagan was a danger because he was poking a bear that could kill us all just by pushing a button. And everybody was so fearful. And you got to hide under your desk in grammar school. And you want to know what? And we've said this on the show before here at the front line with Joe and Joe. The end of the Soviet Union started with a Catholic Mass that was celebrated in Poland. Let's be clear about that. All right. Why are we so afraid of China? Why? We're
Yeah.
America, and we have allies, by the way. Even though our allies can be squishy a lot of times, but I would say that those allies would much prefer doing business with us than China if it came down to something like that. Why are we so afraid, David?
Well, the thing is that, and these are excellent points that you're raising. First of all, it seems to me that we need to keep in mind the fact that, as I said before, our orientation must be spiritual. We need to remember that our religious faith is a source of strength for us. We lose track of that. We sink into materialism. We make ourselves weaker as a people. We make our whole quality of life weaker. It's a terrible mistake when we sink into thinking that all that life consists of is material concerns and material pleasures. That's the first thing. Because if we lose track of the spiritual orientation in life, then the temptation is simply to watch the money pile up, right? And to become obsessed with our physical security, And, I've often said to my students, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you set aside your personal comfort and your personal security, and you stand up for what you truly believe in. But what happens is that people, they lose track. They lose track of what should be our fundamental orientation in life. And what I've tried to do in my own teaching is to remind students, that we are all instinctively religious. Even people who call themselves atheists, we have an unconscious heliotropism towards God. And we need to rediscover that constantly. We need to rediscover that. So, I would say that the reason why communist China, in my mind, is more of a threat than the Soviet Union ever was, is because of the fact that we have far more economic and business links with China than we ever did with the Soviet Union. And so there's that constant temptation to be seduced, that's the word, to be seduced by the prospect of making ever more money.
And then the funny thing too is, Xi Jinping doesn't walk around in, gray pajamas, or dress like Joseph Stalin. He wears a business suit. So do all the rest of his thugs. So they
Yeah.
look presentable. They look like a legitimate government. In the meantime, people need to be reminded, and that's why we're so happy you're here, David Pinault, to remind people, no, this is a brutal, brutal totalitarian regime. Joe Resinello.
The Trump administration, particularly Donald Trump, has committed to to protecting Christians. He even said Catholics specifically. I heard it out of his own mouth in this country as well as abroad. In recent years, I'll just pick a couple countries: Sudan, Nigeria. Christians are being slaughtered. Name another country: Egypt. Christians are being slaughtered. Um, America hasn't said a word. This is a Judeo-Christian nation. Every single state, the first sentence of the preamble of that state mentions God. And we've completely forgotten about that. And we don't say a word. We don't even talk about it. I heard a bishop in Nigeria say Catholics are being slaughtered like chickens in Nigeria. His exact words. Where is the voice of America? Nowhere to be found. Now let's circle it back. We talked about Hong Kong, what's going on there. Where is the voice of America? Now let's talk about Taiwan. What is the faith situation in Taiwan? Clearly, the Catholic Church is there. And frankly, will America, particularly Donald Trump, speak out against the atrocities committed against religious liberties in Taiwan and Hong
Yeah.
Kong, for that matter?
Right. So, yes. Well, first of all, I should note that in Taiwan, the majority of the population is Buddhist or a Taoist or a combination thereof. But there is a very significant and very active and vibrant Christian population there. About 7% of the population is Christian. We went to Catholic church, to Catholic Mass while we were there in the capital city of Taipei. And like their fellow citizens, the Catholic Christians of Taiwan are very aware of the threat from communist China. And I would say everywhere we went, people that we talked to, everyone is aware of the ongoing threat from communist China. Then the question is, okay, what's going to happen now? This is, to me, a very, very interesting question. What's going to happen now with the incoming Trump administration? Because I see this as an opportunity. How will America position itself? As you had mentioned, President-elect Trump has spoken out before on behalf of Christians worldwide. So now the question is, what is going to happen? Of course, no one can predict exactly, but it's certainly something that's worth thinking about. The question is, will foreign countries, and I'm thinking especially of Beijing, I'm thinking especially of the CCP, Communist Chinese Party Chairman Xi Jinping, will they try to flatter Donald Trump? Will they try to offer him a kind of grand deal, business deal, try to appeal to him as a businessman? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, on a more optimistic note, I can point out that President-elect Trump has nominated as Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and for his national security advisor, Mike Waltz. These are both men who are what I would call outspoken China hawks. They have no delusions about how destructive and how evil the Chinese Communist Party is. So my hope is that with people like this at the helm, that we can begin collectively as a nation to wake up to the threat presented by the Chinese Communist Party. And then in turn, and this is very important, as I mentioned before, we should be interested in Taiwan, A, for the sake of the Taiwanese people themselves, who want to be able to continue to exercise their democratic freedoms. The Taiwanese people are aware of how their religious expression will be crushed under the Chinese Communist Party. But B, we have to also understand that if Taiwan is taken by the Chinese Communist Party, then Taiwan is going to become a forward base for menacing us in the Pacific Ocean. There's no question in my mind about that. China will not stop there. We can learn a lot of lessons from the history of what happened in the late 1930s. In fact, Jody and I often say to each other, we are right now in early 1939. Okay, the storm clouds are gathering. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay, just as there were dictators in the late 1930s, that's happening now, and we need to wake up to be aware of the fact that we are at a kind of crisis point in facing the Chinese Communist Party. Supporting Taiwan is good for the people of Taiwan, but it's also vital to the interests of the American people.
David Pinault, let me ask you this. What is the economic situation in Taiwan? How strong are they economically?
They are actually in a very good position economically. And it's important to point out, many of our listeners may already be aware of this, that Taiwan is the world leader in terms of producing the microchips that are vital to IT and electronic industries worldwide. You may have heard of TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I noted in recent years that, and I mentioned this in the article, that TSMC, the Taiwanese, are trying to help us. They have established manufacturing plants in Arizona, in Phoenix, so to help us achieve, I would say, more independence, less reliance on China. So Taiwan is trying to further and increase its links with us.
To put it in context, just that's what I was looking at on my phone, because I follow the market. I follow, obviously, NVIDIA, many of the chip stocks. Taiwan Semiconductor has a $1 trillion market cap. They're $1 trillion company. That's a powerhouse. To put that in perspective, I think NVIDIA is probably the market leader. They're probably at about $2.5 trillion. But Taiwan Semiconductor is $1 trillion entity. Not too shabby, as you said. David Pinault is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please click the link in the description. Go read the full essay that's available at the Catholic World Report, Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli Reflections on Taiwan's Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End of Time. Joe Rossinello.
Everything you said is valid. Just circling back to Trump's rhetoric, he is not looking for foreign wars. He's trying to basically de-escalate what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. If China was to get aggressive, which is very possible, how is that going to fit into that rhetoric? I'm not saying we're going to get involved in a full-on war, but it seems to me that Trump has a different worldview than a lot of the other American presidents before him, including George Bush, including Biden, including Obama, all of which said one thing and then kind of with the other side of their mouth were dropping bombs from drones, the whole deal. How is this going to fit in to his message to the American people if China gets aggressive, that America is not going to involve in foreign wars?
Yes, well, that's a very good question. And of course, first of all, no one knows for sure what's going to happen. And it may be that President-elect Trump is sort of improvising as he goes. And so will his deeds match his rhetoric as he takes up office again? We'll have to see. So now the interesting question is, my concern personally, if one says categorically, we will not go to war, then that could give an impression of weakness, which we need to avoid. As they say, if you want peace, prepare for war. Sometimes we have to be ready for that. I personally think that we need to increase our defense budget. We need to strengthen our armed forces, particularly our Navy. I'm aware of the fact, as many political analysts have pointed out who specialize in China, China is especially afraid of our undersea fleet. of our nuclear attack submarines, because those are much harder to trace. So that's our kind of ace in the hole there. We if we take a hands-off attitude towards China's invasion, we will definitely suffer for that in the very, very near future. As I said, what happens in Taiwan is not something that's simply going to stay there. The ripple effect will be very strong and very immediate. I think that what I'm hoping, as I mentioned before, Trump has nominated in Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz men who are very aware of the threat. I would also recommend to you the writings of Matt Pottinger, who played a very strong role in the previous Trump administration. Matt Pottinger is someone who had been a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, military veteran, served as a correspondent in China, speaks fluent Mandarin, and Pottinger has paid very strong attention to the threat posed by the CCP. So there are people that Trump can draw on for advice, and I would say my hope would be that the new Trump administration will realize that standing strong now helps to lessen the risk of war. Now, the question is, what do we do if China actually invades? And this is a very complicated question because of the fact that we need to be aware, first of all, that to launch an invasion across 100 miles of ocean, the Taiwan Strait, that's a risky enterprise, even if China outnumbers Taiwan tremendously. It's still risky. It's still very, very risky. What Xi Jinping, and you can see whether I'm right or wrong about this, but one of the things that retired Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials said to us, that what is going on is China is attempting a kind of anaconda grip on us, he said, that is gradually tightening, strangling, and squeezing us, so that what may happen is a gradual kind of blockade. We have to be aware of that risk as well, that what China may do is simply sort of they use the term, sort of like salami slicing, like taking a little bit at a time. So in other words, it seems to me, one of the things that President Obama did not do in the South China Sea was to push back immediately as China began fortifying those islets and shoals in the South China Sea. In other words, it seems to me, based on my own experience in the region, that we need to be vigilant and not simply wait for an invasion. We need to be doing what we can now to engage in what you call price tagging, making the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, aware that there's a price to be paid for every step that it takes in this gradual intimidation process. We should be pushing back.
No, absolutely. David, I'm sorry to cut you off because we only have a couple of minutes left. This is the Front Line with Joe and Joe, and we are on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. You ended your article with the comment, serpents that threaten to swallow us. We are not alone in facing them. We have Christ crucified and his blessed mother. You say in the article, that thought gave me hope. Let's talk about that. We have about a minute and a half, 2 minutes left. We always have to keep that in mind. We started the conversation by talking about the necessity of relying on the spiritual, emphasizing the spiritual, not the material. This is obviously a dangerous situation with China, but there is always hope because of Christ. I'm going to throw it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And that meditation at the end of my article came from a mass that Jody and I attended at a Catholic church in Da'an district in Taipei, the capital city of Taiwan. And I invite readers to look at that in full. But one of the things that struck me, seeing a statue in the church of Mary with the halo of stars that marks her as Regina Caeli, as Queen of Heaven. And I remind readers that many such statues feature the Virgin Mary, Blessed Virgin Mary, standing, and her foot, beneath her foot, is a writhing serpent. Okay, and And of course, as the Vulgate version of the Book of Genesis in the Bible tells us, um, God says to the serpent, "She will crush your head." Okay, and that was a real comfort to me. Okay, talking to people about all these threats of invasion, and being in church like that, being at mass, reminded me we're not alone in what we face. Any kind of crisis, any kind of suffering that we face, we have with us as company in solidarity the Blessed Virgin Mary and Christ crucified. We are not alone in the suffering and the crisis that we face. And that is a tremendous, the source of strength for us. We can never forget that. We should never forget it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. David Pinault, it's such a pleasure talking to you. We encourage you all out there. Please go and read the article. It's published, or essay. It's published in the Catholic World Report, Taiwan, China, and the Regina Caeli, Reflections on Taiwan's Survival, Communist Invasion, and a Gospel Reading for the End Time. Now, David, in just 30 seconds, now the Crucifix on Mecca's Front Porch, a Christian's Companion for the Study of Islam, and your novel, Providence Blue, a Fantasy Quest. Those are available where?
Those are available on Amazon. You can find them there. Also at Ignatius.com. That's the publisher, Ignatius Press. And as you mentioned before, I've got a new novel coming out that talks about the threat from communist China. It's called Earth Dragon Run, a spiritual entertainment. Ignatius will be publishing that in April.
Absolutely. David Pinault, thank you so much for reaching out to us. We're glad you came on to have this important conversation. We're going to blast this out wherever we can and just try to do what Joe and I always try to do, which is help people to raise their consciousness as to the reality of what's going on in the world. In China, and the dangers that China poses is a reality we really need to come to grips with. So we're very, very grateful that you came on and got into the weeds with us a little bit on that and help people to understand the level of seriousness of this. So David Pinault, God bless you, brother. You know you're welcome back here anytime.
Thank you so much. A great pleasure and an honor to talk with both of you. God bless.
God bless you, and thank you out there for joining us at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area, wherever you're seeing Joe and I, this interview in particular. Help us out. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Thank you once again, and remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.